Hi, everyone. Today we'll be talking about something that I'm sure will not cause a flame war in my comments, the American Civil War. Okay, so we're not actually talking about the war itself as much as something that happened after the war. Now, before we go any farther, I will break down the American Civil War just really quickly, as apparently I actually have a pretty sizable audience from India, of all places. Basically, a long time ago, the United States split up into two groups, what we called the Union, or the North, as we refer to them here in the US, and the Confederates, or the South. This is because the Union was made up mostly of the northern parts of the country, and the Confederacy was mostly the southern states. One of the main points of contention was that slavery was legal in the southern states, and the northern states in the US thought that that really wasn't super cool. And so this eventually boiled over into a war, which eventually killed around 600,000 Americans, give or take, and also depending on who's counting. Now, all you really need to know for this story is that the South, or the Confederates, are the side that wanted to keep slaves, boo, and they're also the side that lost. Yay! Now, as most of you can imagine, when the South lost, they had to give up their slaves, and a lot of them were not super happy about that. And so they began looking for alternate ways of keeping their power, and for a pretty sizable amount of them, they actually ended up leaving the country. Where these loser Confederates ended up going is Brazil, of all places. The reason for the move to Brazil is actually pretty simple. The emperor of Brazil at the time was a guy named Dom Pedro II, and he wanted to grow his country's cotton market. And so he sought what he called the expertise of Southern Confederate cotton farmers. For the Confederates, the appeal of Brazil was pretty simple. Slavery was still legal there. And in fact, slavery would remain legal in Brazil until 1888, which is nearly 20 years after the end of the American Civil War. Another aside here, Brazil was actually the last country in the Western Hemisphere to outlaw slavery. So, good job, Brazil. So, these Southern Confederates come to Brazil. They bring their slaves with them, and they seek a way to continue their old lifestyle, owning slaves, picking cotton, getting rich off of other people. One Confederate, upon settling in Brazil, actually bragged to his family back in the US that he had made $5,000 in just 1 week, which is impressive even today, let alone 1868. In total, about 20,000 Confederates immigrated from the United States to Brazil, and when they came to Brazil, they made the extremely American move of creating a new town and naming it after themselves, which they called Americana, which is actually still around today in Brazil. In modern times, the descendants of these Confederate immigrants are called Confederados, and they actually throw a festival every year to celebrate their heritage. And some of these things include Southern comfort food in the middle of like rural Brazil, which is just super wild to me. That down in Brazil somewhere, people are just munching on cornbread and fried okra. A US president even came down to visit the festival one time. President Jimmy Carter came down to see the festival, as his wife is actually distantly related to one of the original immigrants and is buried there. President Carter even remarked that these people sounded and looked like Southerners. But some of the celebrations are also, well, just take a look at this. So, for those of you who are not American, let me break this down. The outfits you see them wearing are Confederate soldier outfits, and the flag that they wave around is actually the Confederate flag, which is the flag that the South used during the Civil War. Now, you probably can't tell, as I never managed to pick up the accent, but I myself am a Southerner. I'm from the southern United States, Georgia to be specific, go dogs. But growing up in the South and seeing people do this is like really wild to me. Like seeing them eat things like cornbread and fried chicken and collard greens is cool because like I eat that. That's Southern comfort food. But waving around the Confederate flag, dressing up like soldiers, I can't really explain this, but it's like really kind of gross feeling to see them do this. Like maybe I'm being dramatic, but here in the United States, especially in the South, Confederates are not something to be proud of. At least not by anyone with like any amount of empathy. Whenever I see people down here that are like proud of their Confederate heritage, they're usually like made fun of by other people down here. 'Cause we grew up with that stuff being in our face and kind of confronting what people in our families did in the past. The Confederates were horrible people. They ended up going on to form groups like the KKK. And like I said, I grew up in Georgia. And a lot of that hate still exists, whether people want to admit it or not. Shit, there was a KKK headquarters 45 minutes from my house growing up. And on the way to my wedding in North Georgia, I drove past another headquarters for the KKK called the Confederate Knight or the Knights of the Confederacy, something like that. So to see people in Brazil just really proudly waving the flag around and playing dress up in racist soldier uniforms is just really, really weird. It's like uncanny, especially considering that most of these people they're celebrating would probably hate their guts. Sorry to leave this one on a bummer and kind of like unscripted there at the end. I don't know. Just seeing this really kind of threw me off towards the end. At first, I thought I was going to be like, oh, this will be a fun, interesting video, but like that really just kind of threw me off. But don't worry, next time we'll talk about something more fun. My next video is about people trying to sue God. So please leave a like if you enjoyed, as it really helps the channel out. And if you did enjoy, please subscribe, as I'm going to be upping the amount of videos that I do in the summer now that school's out. Or don't, I'm not your dad. Bye.